yourself, and even what kind of things happen to you. There is a correlation which is not always immediately recognizable, but there is a correlation between a person's predominant mental emotional state and who they are with, who their friends are, where they work, and even what happens to them. So if you are in a very negative state a long time, you tend to attract also negative events, but you can only have to find that out for yourself. I'm not saying believe me. I know it from my own life, because when I first discovered this, I was still very young. I discovered that there is a correlation between my mind activity and what happens to me. I found a book several books that somebody left with us when I was 17. And there, for the first time, I read about a person's mind, and I suddenly realized my mind was predominantly negative, because I was a very unhappy child. And so my childhood was not pleasant. And so the initial conditioning of my life was that my mind was continuously commenting and saying how bad my life was. And whenever something bad happened to me, I had a phrase that would occur again in my mind that, of course, bad things always happen to you, don't they? They're bound to happen to you. It always happens to you. So I was talking to myself and saying that bad things would always happen to me, and they did. So you can discover first that the spiritual awakening is to discover that there is continuous mind activity. And for some people, it's the discovery that a significant part of their mind activity is negative. But the vital thing is to discover that there is this continuous talk in my head, which is considered the normal human state. And of course, you cannot abolish thinking. Of course, there will be thinking. But the question is there an awareness behind the thinking? If you can become aware that you are indulging or caught up in that useless mind activity, and you suddenly become aware of perhaps certain repetitive thoughts that tend to reoccur in your mind again and again. You might see it in others too, more easily in others. When you go for your Thanksgiving dinner, I think is it next week, you will meet your family members or relatives, and some of you may realize you already know what they are going to say this year, because it's the same thing they said last year and 5 years and 10 years ago. And if they have negative judgments about you or somebody else, then it's the same thing you will hear again next week when you go to them. So it's easier to see how others are caught up in repetitive thought forms, not as easy to see it in oneself. This is why there's a saying that self-knowledge is the most difficult knowledge. It's easier to see others. But if you can discover, even in the midst, perhaps, in the moment of a certain thought appearing in your mind, realizing, oh, that thought I've had this thought for years, it comes again and again and again. And so there is an observing presence, and from there you can, and that observing presence isn't a thought, it's just the ability to realize that there is a voice in your head and that there are thoughts. And you realize that some of those thoughts are negative, and many of those thoughts actually are not only unnecessary, but make your life very difficult, such as worry. So most people live with what I call a cluttered mind. A cluttered mind means they are completely unaware that there's a continuous stream of mental commentary that it goes. And wherever they meet somebody, immediately certain judgments form. And everything they feel, they need to immediately adopt a position towards it. Immediately say, I'm against it, I like that. So, immediately adapt a mental position, and being identified with one's mental position, which is a